The alien market was alive with light and color. Neon signs glowed in languages from 100 worlds. Spices floated in the air, sharp and sweet, mixed with the smell of roasted meat. Voices called out from stalls, bargaining, shouting, laughing. It was a place full of life, full of noise, full of everything except kindness for the weak. Through the crowd walked a stranger, a human, thin and tired, clothes worn down from travel. His boots were coated in dust, his face pale, his eyes hollow with hunger. He had been moving for days, planet to planet, station to station, looking for work. But here in this alien city, no one cared for a hungry human. He stopped at a stall filled with food, fruits that glowed softly, bread that steamed with warmth, bowls of hot soup giving out rich smells. His stomach growled so loud that even the merchant behind the stall raised a brow. The human lowered his head. "Please," he said softly. "I have no coins, no tokens, no credits." The merchant stared, his skin shimmering blue under the lights, his forearms folding across his chest. Around them, aliens with bright scales and tall horns turned to listen. The merchant's mouth curved into something like a smile, but it was not kind. "No trade, no food," the merchant said, his voice deep and mocking. "Unless," he added, tilting his head, "you have something else to offer." The human swallowed, his throat dry. He knew he had nothing except the voice inside him. It had been his comfort through nights of loneliness, his strength in times of fear, and now, with nothing left, he whispered, "Would you take a song?" The words spread like fire. A few aliens chuckled, others leaned closer. The merchant laughed loudly, the sound like broken glass. "Food for a song? A song? Ha! Listen, all of you," the human begs for food with music. The crowd grew thicker, creatures of every shape pressing in, some curious, some cruel. "Sing then, human," the merchant said, eyes shining with mockery. "Sing us your little song, and maybe I'll give you a crumb." The human's hands trembled. He wanted to run, but his legs were weak. He wanted to scream, but his throat was tight. And yet deep in his chest there was a fire. It whispered, better to sing and fail than to die silent. He closed his eyes, blocking out the laughter, the whispers, the glowing eyes. And then he began. At first his voice was small, like a thread of sound in the air. The crowd leaned closer, ready to laugh again. But the sound did not break. It carried, trembling, fragile, yet clear. The words were not in their tongue. But the feeling reached them. It was the voice of a human. Empty stomach, tired feet, lonely heart. A song of hunger, of longing, of home far away. The market noise slowly faded, one stall at a time falling quiet. Even the mocking merchant lowered his arms, his smile frozen. The human sang as if he was pouring his soul out of his body. The notes rose and fell like waves, carrying his pain, carrying his hope. Some aliens tilted their heads, strange feelings stirring in their chests. Some blinked, confused, as if remembering something they had lost long ago. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. Even the lights of the market seemed softer, as if listening too. When the last note faded, silence wrapped the place. No one laughed, no one jeered, no one moved. The human opened his eyes, breath shaking. He saw the merchant staring at him, wide-eyed, speechless, and he wondered, had he failed? Or had he just changed something no one expected? Suspense filled the air. The crowd waited, the human waited, and the story had only just begun. The silence in the alien marketplace did not last long. When the human's last note faded, a strange emptiness fell over the crowd. Dozens of eyes, glowing in different colors, stared at him. For a single breath, it seemed as if the whole city had forgotten to move. Then, like a sudden crack of thunder, laughter broke the air. One alien snorted, then another burst into chuckles, and soon half the circle was laughing. The human's cheeks burned red, his head lowered, but his legs held firm. The merchant, the same one who had mocked before, slapped the counter of his stall. His forearms shook with amusement, his voice booming across the square. "A song," he said loudly. "A song is all the human has," the words echoed. And the laughter grew sharper. It was no longer curious laughter. It was cruel laughter. "Did you hear him?" One alien whispered, his long antennae twitching. "He thinks his voice is worth food," another said, her scaled face grinning. "Maybe he should dance too," a tall creature added, shaking with laughter. The human looked around, his chest heavy. Everywhere he turned, eyes mocked him, voices cut into him. He wanted to vanish, but something inside told him not to bow. Not yet. The merchant leaned forward, eyes gleaming with malice. "Sing again, human," he demanded. "Sing louder, so we can all enjoy the comedy." The crowd murmured in agreement, some stamping feet, others clicking claws. "Sing," they chanted. "Sing, sing, sing." The sound was like a drumbeat closing in. The human felt trapped, like prey surrounded by hunters, and yet within the noise. A thought rose: if they demand my voice, then I will give it, but not the way they expect. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes meeting the crowd. His face no longer begged, it carried a strange calm. He opened his mouth and sang again, but this time the notes were different. Not soft, not trembling, but strong and sharp. His voice cut through the jeers like a blade. Every note climbed higher, carried farther. It was no longer the song of hunger. It was the song of defiance. The aliens shifted, their laughter stumbled. The mocking chant broke as the melody wrapped around them. It carried anger, pain, but also a hidden challenge. The human sang not like a beggar, but like a warrior refusing to kneel. The crowd grew uneasy, their grins fading, their eyes narrowing. They could not understand the words, but they felt the weight. It pressed on their chests, made their hearts race. Some stepped back without knowing why. The merchant's smile faltered. He had wanted a joke, but now he saw power. And power was dangerous. He slammed his hands on the stall again, desperate to regain control. "Enough!" he shouted. Enough of this noise. But even as he spoke, his voice seemed smaller compared to the human song. The melody wrapped around his words, drowning them. The crowd's attention was no longer on him. It was on the human. A small alien child tugged at her mother's arm. Her wide eyes shimmered with tears, though she did not know why. An old scaled creature wiped at his cheek, confused by the moisture there. The crowd that had mocked now shifted in mood. Whispers spread, softer than before, uncertain, unsettled. What is this? One asked, "Why do I feel strange?" Another murmured. The human finished the song with a long, lingering note. When it ended, silence returned once more. But this silence was not empty. It was heavy with thought. The human's chest rose and fell as he breathed. He looked at the merchant, who now glared at him with narrowed eyes. The merchant's laughter was gone, replaced by something colder. Sharper, it was jealousy, it was anger, it was fear. The human bowed his head slightly, not in defeat but in quiet strength. He had given them what they demanded, but not in the way they wished. Now the question hung in the air. What would they do next? Would they cheer or punish him? Would they feed him or cast him out? The mocking crowd had changed, but into what, no one could yet say. And in that silence, the story pushed forward, deeper into the unknown. The human stood in the center of the marketplace. The crowd surrounded him, hundreds of eyes locked on him. A moment ago they had laughed, mocked, and jeered, but now, silence stretched like a thin rope ready to snap. The human could feel their tension, the mix of curiosity and unease. He knew this was his only chance. His one moment, he closed his eyes again, and the air seemed to hold its breath with him. Then he began to sing, not softly this time, not as a desperate plea, but with a voice steady and sure. A voice that carried something deeper than hunger. The sound was strange in the market. Amid neon lights, alien shouts, and the hiss of machines, the song rose like a wave. The melody was simple, but there was weight inside it. Every note trembled with memory, with the story of a race that had struggled but never given up. It was a song of humans who had crossed oceans and stars. It was a song of nights spent cold and alone, yet never silent, a song of survival, of hope that refused to die. The first few notes reached the crowd like a whisper, but then the air itself seemed to bend and carry the sound farther. The song was not in their language, yet it pierced them. They did not need words to understand. They felt it raw and sharp deep inside their chests. An alien with horned ridges felt his throat tighten. He did not know why his hands shook. A scaled merchant blinked rapidly, his vision blurred with something wet he had never felt before. The child who had tugged at her mother's hand leaned forward. Wide-eyed, she did not laugh, she did not jeer, she only listened. The song was weaving itself into their hearts. The human sang of hunger, not only for food but for dignity. He sang of loss, not only of home but of kindness. He sang of strength, not only of himself but of his people, and as his voice rose, the marketplace changed. The sound of bargaining stopped. The smell of spices felt sharper. Even the neon lights seemed dimmer, as if the world itself leaned in closer to listen. The mocking merchant clenched his fists, his chest pounding. He wanted to shout again to call it a trick, but the song would not let him. It wrapped around him like chains, invisible but unbreakable. Every note pressed into him. Every rise in the melody pulled at something he had buried, something he did not want to feel. The human song grew stronger, carrying higher. The silence of the crowd turned into awe. They had gathered for a joke, but what they heard was truth. They had come to mock, but now they were caught. Every listener felt as if the human was singing only for them. Their grief, their loneliness, their unspoken fears all echoed in his voice, and still the human sang. He was no longer just hungry. He was no longer just tired. In that moment, he was more. He was the voice of a race, a symbol of something larger than himself. His notes flew higher, filling the air with light no eyes could see. The crowd held their breath, afraid to break it, afraid to move. When the final note rang, it did not fade quickly. It lingered like the last ray of sun before night. It hung over the market, gentle but unshakable, and when it finally slipped into silence, the air itself seemed to sigh. The human opened his eyes. His chest rising and falling, he looked around at the still faces. At the silent crowd, he did not see mockery now. He saw something else. Some stared at him with wide eyes. Others with trembling hands, some had tears they did not understand. The child clapped once, then covered her mouth as if afraid. The sound was small, but it broke the spell. Whispers spread, soft and shaky. "What was that?" One alien asked. "It hurt," another said, "but it was beautiful." "I felt something," a third whispered, voice unsteady, the merchant's face twisted. Caught between rage and fear, he wanted to deny it. But the truth was too clear. The human song had touched them, reached where nothing else could. The human bowed his head slightly, not begging, not pleading, but as a gesture of respect. He had given them his song, his soul. Now the question hung heavy in the silence. What would they give him in return? Suspense filled the air once more. The marketplace was no longer the same. The human's voice had changed it, and the story was only moving deeper, for the song had not only fed his spirit, it had fed something inside every alien heart. The silence after the human song still hung over the market. The neon lights flickered against the still faces of the crowd. The air was heavy, as if no one dared breathe too loudly. The human stood in the middle, head bowed, chest rising and falling. He had given everything in that song, and now he waited. He did not know if the crowd would cheer or crush him. The mocking merchant's eyes burned with anger. His lips curled as he tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. The crowd no longer looked at him. They looked at the human. And in that shift, the merchant felt something he hated most. He felt invisible. Then movement broke the silence. From the edge of the crowd, a small figure stepped forward. It was the child who had pulled her mother's arm earlier. Her large eyes still shone with wonder, and in her tiny hand she carried something. It was a piece of glowing fruit, warm and sweet-smelling. The crowd gasped as the child walked toward the human. Her little feet tapped softly against the stone floor. Her mother reached out to stop her, but then froze. Something in the child's eyes held her back. The human lifted his head, confused. He saw the small alien child standing before him. She held out the glowing fruit with trembling hands. "For you," she whispered in her tongue. The human did not know the words, but he understood the meaning. The crowd fell even quieter, waiting to see what would happen. The human knelt slowly, his hand shaking as he accepted the fruit. His fingers brushed against the child's, and for a heartbeat 2 worlds touched. His voice, her gift, joined in silent exchange. The human whispered, "Thank you," his eyes wet. He bit into the fruit, its sweetness filling his mouth, its warmth filling his body. For the first time in days, he felt fed, but more than food, he felt seen. The moment cracked the tension like a stone into still water. Ripples spread through the crowd. Another alien stepped forward, placing a piece of bread-like food at his feet. Then another pushed through, handing him a coin that glowed faintly. One by one, gifts began to flow. Fruits, bread, dried meats, even small trinkets of value. The human's arms filled. His eyes wide with shock. He had sung for survival, but he was being given respect. The mocking merchant's mouth hung open in disbelief. He slammed one fist on the counter, but no one turned to him. His mocking voice had no power now, drowned under the weight of the crowd's change. The crowd no longer laughed. They honored. They saw in the human something rare, something precious. They had come to watch him fail. and now they could not look away from his victory. Whispers filled the air like wind. "Humans sing with soul," one said. "I felt his hunger," another murmured. "It was more than sound, it was truth," a third whispered. And the gifts kept coming, piling at the human's feet until he could hardly carry them. The human's heart ached, but not from hunger now. He bowed his head, whispering words of thanks they could not understand. Yet his tone carried meaning, the crowd felt it, and many lowered their heads in return. It was no longer a crowd mocking a beggar. It was a crowd honoring a voice. The merchant who had laughed hardest now felt the cold of jealousy creeping inside him. He muttered through his teeth, "Trickery. This must be trickery." But no one listened. They were busy watching a miracle unfold before their eyes. For in this galaxy, trade was cold, everything had a price. And yet here, for the first time, something priceless was given freely. The human song had broken the law of the market. It had replaced it with something older, something deeper, a truth the crowd had forgotten, that hearts could be moved. Not just wallets, as the human stood with arms full of gifts. He looked around the circle. He did not see enemies anymore. He saw faces that had been touched by his voice. He saw the child smiling shyly, her small act becoming the spark for everything, and he understood. This was more than food. This was a beginning. The crowd began to cheer softly, not with wild noise, but with a quiet strength. They had been changed, and they knew it. The mocking merchant stood alone now, bitterness twisting his face, but the human did not look at him. He only looked at the child, then the crowd, and felt something grow in his chest. Hope, the first gift, had been a fruit, but the true gift was something greater. It was the moment the human was no longer just a hungry stranger. He had become something else. A voice that could not be ignored. The marketplace was alive again, but it was no longer the same place. Where there had once been laughter and cruelty, there was now awe and respect. The human stood in the center with arms full of gifts, his body weak but his spirit strong. The child who had given the first fruit clung to her mother's hand. Her wide eyes shining with pride, the crowd whispered softly, their voices carrying wonder instead of mockery, but not every heart had changed. The merchant who had first laughed at the human now stood frozen behind his stall, his forearms clenched, his eyes glowing with sharp anger. He had expected the human to crawl, to beg, to be broken. Instead, he had become the center of attention. Instead, he had stolen the crowd. The merchant's pride burned hotter than fire. He was used to power, used to control, used to being the voice others listened to. But now no one looked at him. The alien elder in the corner was nodding in respect toward the human. The guards at the edge of the square were whispering among themselves, and every gift given to the human felt like a slap to the merchant's face. "This is a trick," the merchant hissed suddenly, his voice cutting into the whispers. The crowd turned, startled, as the merchant slammed his hands against the counter. "This human uses strange powers, hidden magic. Forbidden tricks," he shouted. "He bewitched you with his noise, fooled you with his sounds." His words crawled like poison, his tone sharp with venom. Some in the crowd frowned, uncertain. The memory of the song still lingered in their hearts. They knew it was no spell, it was something deeper. But doubt was a dangerous seed, and the merchant watered it with every bitter word. "Look at him," the merchant sneered, pointing one sharp finger. "Empty hands, empty pockets, yet now he carries riches, gifts, respect." His laugh was bitter, full of venom. "Is this fair? Is this the way of trade? A song for food, a cry for treasure?" The crowd stirred, whispers rising. Some muttered that it was wrong. Others argued it was right. Voices clashed. The air filled again with tension. The human stood quietly, his arms heavy with gifts. He did not shout, he did not argue. He only looked at the merchant with calm, tired eyes. And that calmness made the merchant's fury rise even higher. "Guards!" the merchant barked. "Guards!" "Take him." Two armored figures stepped forward, their weapons gleaming in the neon glow. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "No," one alien said. "He sang. He gave us truth. It was no trick," another argued. But the guards still moved. Caught between duty and doubt, their heavy boots echoed, carrying dread with every step. The child who had given the fruit cried out. "Stop!" she shouted, her small voice breaking the silence. Her words were simple, but they cut through the market like a blade. All eyes turned to her. She stood trembling, but her chin lifted. He did not trick us, she said, her voice shaking. I gave because I wanted to. The mother pulled her close. But others in the crowd nodded. Yes, one said. He moved us. But not with magic. He showed us something real, another agreed. The guards hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly. The merchant snarled, his lips pulling back in rage.
Fools, he spat. All of you fools blinded by weakness. The human finally spoke.
His voice quiet but steady. It was only a song, he said. Simple words, but they carried weight. The crowd hushed, leaning closer to hear. I asked for food. I had nothing to give but my voice, he continued. If that is a crime, then take me. He spread his arms slightly, the gifts tumbling to the ground, rolling across the stone. The sound of fruit rolling, coins clinking, echoed louder than the merchant's anger. The crowd watched as the human stood unafraid. The guards looked at one another, then at the merchant, then back at the human, and still they did not move. The marketplace seemed to hold its breath. The human's calm was a storm in itself. The merchant screamed again, Take him! He is a danger, a liar, a thief! But the words no longer held power. They fell empty, drowned under the memory of the song. The crowd began to murmur again, but this time the whispers grew stronger. Not of doubt, but of defiance. No trick, they said. No crime. The human stood taller, though his body was weak. And for the first time in the market's history, the people turned not toward the merchant, but away from him. The jealous merchant stood alone, his power slipping through his fingers like dust, and the human, the hungry stranger, had become something far greater, not by wealth, not by strength, but by the gift of a song. Suspense crackled in the air. For though the crowd stood with the human, the merchant's jealousy was far from finished, and in the shadows of the market, something darker was waiting to unfold. The crowd stood divided in the glowing market square. Some whispered in defense of the human, others still feared the merchant's words. The guards hovered uncertainly, their weapons half raised, their eyes shifting between duty and doubt. The gifts the human had been given lay scattered at his feet, glowing fruit rolling across the stones, coins glinting in the neon light, and in the center stood the human himself, empty-handed now. His voice calm, though his fate was uncertain. The merchant's voice echoed again, sharp with fury. Take him, he roared, his arms slamming the stall. He poisons the air with his tricks, but his words rang hollow, falling into a silence heavier than before. For from the far side of the marketplace a figure was moving forward. The crowd parted at once, whispers rippling. An elder, someone breathed. The elder comes. The elder was tall, his body draped in deep robes of silver and black. His skin was old and lined, his eyes glowing softly with wisdom rather than fire. He leaned on a staff carved with symbols older than the city itself. The crowd bowed their heads slightly, for elders carried weight beyond merchants or guards. Even the merchant swallowed his rage for a heartbeat as the figure drew near. The elder's gaze swept the square. He looked at the human, at the scattered gifts, at the angry merchant. Then his deep voice rumbled, slow and heavy. What has happened here? He asked. The merchant was quick to speak, eager to twist the truth. This human is a beggar, a trickster, he hissed. He sings spells to cloud your minds. He steals food and respect with nothing but noise. The elder raised a hand, and the merchant's words died in his throat. The elder's eyes turned to the human. You, he said, is this true? The human bowed his head slightly, his voice quiet but strong. I have nothing, he said. I was hungry. I asked for food. He lifted his eyes. Steady and honest, I had no coin, no token, only my voice. So I gave my song. The elder studied him in silence. Then he nodded once, slowly. Sing again, the elder said. Not for food, not for trade, but for truth. The marketplace froze. The crowd leaned closer, even the guards held still. The merchant sputtered with rage. No, this is a waste. This is... But the elder's gaze silenced him with a single glance. The human's heart pounded, his throat dry. Yet he knew this was the moment. Not to beg, not to fight, but to show who he was. He closed his eyes and began to sing once more. This time the notes were soft, not loud, not sharp. They floated through the air like falling rain, gentle and pure. It was not a song of hunger now, but of honesty. A song that carried no demand. Only truth. It spoke of long journeys, of loneliness, of carrying hope even when it weighed heavy. It spoke of nights where the stars felt like friends, of mornings where the sun rose though no one was there to see. Every note was simple, but every note was real. The elder listened with closed eyes, his hand resting lightly on his staff. The crowd listened too, their earlier doubts melting away. Even those who had laughed now stood silent. Their hearts stirred in ways they could not explain. The merchant trembled with rage, but even he could not break the spell of the melody. When the song ended, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something invisible, something greater than trade or law. The elder opened his eyes, his voice steady and sure. "This is no trick," he declared. "This is no magic, no poison, no theft." He looked at the crowd, his words carrying weight like stone. "What you felt was spirit. What you heard was truth," the crowd murmured, their voices soft but full of agreement. Some nodded, some bowed their heads, some even pressed hands to their chests, for they knew the elder's words were right. The guards lowered their weapons. Stepping back slowly, the human opened his eyes, relief flooding his tired frame, but more than relief. There was something else, dignity. He had not begged, he had not pleaded, he had sung, and the truth had been heard. The merchant, his face twisted with defeat, tried one last time. "This changes nothing," he snapped. "The law of trade is still the law." But the elder turned on him, his staff striking the ground with a heavy sound. "Trade is built on worth," the elder said, his voice sharp now. "And worth comes in many forms," he gestured to the human. "This song is worth more than coin, more than tokens, more than your mockery." The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement. The merchant's power crumbled before his eyes. The human bowed low to the elder, his voice soft. "Thank you," he whispered. Though he knew the elder could not understand the words, but the elder understood the tone, and he nodded in return. The market had changed, and so had the fate of the hungry stranger. This was no longer about survival. It had become something greater. The turning point had arrived, and from here the story would only grow. The marketplace was no longer the same. Where there had once been cruel laughter, now there was quiet respect. Where there had been suspicion, now there was wonder. The human stood with his head bowed, his body weak, yet his spirit blazing. The elder had spoken, and the crowd had listened. The song was no trick, no spell, no theft. It was truth, it was spirit. The human's voice had broken walls no coin could buy. It had shaken the crowd, moved the guards, silenced the merchant. But more than that, it had planted something new, hope. The elder raised his staff again, his voice carrying like thunder through the stalls. "From this day forward," he declared, "let it be known. Songs have worth," the crowd gasped, whispers breaking out instantly. No one had ever traded with music before. In a galaxy where everything had a price, no one had thought of song as currency. But the elder's words turned the impossible into law. The human lifted his head slowly, his eyes wide. He had come here as a beggar, but now something greater had been given to him. Not just food, not just coins, but a place. The crowd began to cheer, not wild, not mocking, but real. Hands clapped, feet stamped, voices rose. "Food for a song," they cried. "Food for a song." The chant grew louder, spreading through the square. It was no longer a joke. It was a truth they had all seen with their own eyes. The merchant stood frozen, his power gone, his face pale with fury. He tried to shout again, but his voice was drowned under the chant. His stall, once the center of the market, was now forgotten, for the center belonged to the human, the singer who had changed everything. The child who had given the first fruit stepped forward once more. She smiled shyly, tugging at her mother's robe. The human knelt before her, placing one of the glowing coins in her hand. She gasped, but he only smiled and shook his head. "You gave first," he whispered softly, though she could not understand. Her gift had begun everything, and he wanted her to know. The crowd surged forward again, but this time not with anger or mockery. They brought more gifts, not only food and coins, but cloth, tools, even small jewels. One alien handed him a carved flute. Another gave him a crystal that hummed when touched. It was not just payment now, it was honor. They wanted to be part of something greater. They wanted to say they had given to the one who sang the truth. The human's arms filled once more, but his heart was heavier than his hands. He felt the weight of their belief, their respect. He was no longer just a hungry stranger. He was a bridge between worlds. The elder stepped closer, his voice low but strong. "Your song has opened a door," he said. "Do not let it close." The human bowed, understanding, though the words were strange. He would not forget this moment. He would carry it, not only in his stomach but in his soul. The chant of the crowd grew until it filled the sky. Food for a song, and with those words, a new law of the galaxy was born, not written in books, not carved in stone, but sung in hearts. The merchant turned away, his pride shattered. But the human did not look at him. He looked instead at the child, at the elder, at the crowd. And he realized something. What had started as hunger had become history. He took a final bite of the fruit, sweet and warm. It filled not only his body but his spirit. He smiled, his voice soft but steady. "Thank you," he whispered. And though few understood his words, all understood his tone. The market lights glowed brighter. The night hummed with life. But in the hearts of those who had listened, something had changed forever. They would tell this story again and again, of the human who came with empty hands but gave them a gift no trade had ever known. And so it was remembered, food for a song, not just food for the body but food for the soul. The song that fed the galaxy, the song that would never die.